I remember my first class. It was super immersive and almost shockingly so. So that by the end of the class, I was so overwhelmed by this sensory experience that I as soon as it was over, I had to lie down and was just like, what did I just experience? I sort of liken it to what somebody might have experienced in the late 1800s when they used the telephone for the first time.
You're listening to Speaking of Language, a podcast recorded at the Language Resource Center at Cornell University. I'm Dan Gable, Technology Manager for the LRC. Each week, we explore a topic related to language pedagogy and second language acquisition. This week, on Speaking of Language, Cornell LRC Director Dick Feldman speaks with Christopher Kaiser of Columbia University. Chris is the program manager of the Shared Course Initiative, which connects less commonly taught language classrooms at Columbia, Cornell, and Yale using high-definition video conferencing. The two discuss the challenges and advantages of offering these classes and reflect on lessons learned over more than half a decade of building a collaborative distance learning program for less commonly taught languages.
So, Chris, is that kind of like any sort of online language class?
I think that's really the first question that people tend to have. Mm-hmm. And there are many ways in which you can collaborate through technology to share a language class or to share any class. But it's a little different in the sense that what we're doing is really a classroom-based synchronous model. So you go into a classroom, you have two large screens, you're joined with other classmates and you're linking up with a teacher maybe on the other side. And so it's really quite different in a way. It's very different from what you might experience with Skype or any other publicly or commonly used video conferencing application. It's really very high definition, very dynamic, very immersive and engaging. So that's something that people, they tend to think, oh, this is going to be like Skype, but it's really categorically different, I would say.
Can you join the class with your pajamas from your room?
Some people think that you can, or they try to. But yeah, no, we don't let that happen because it's really important for us to make sure that you have the same experience in this classroom as you would in a face-to-face classroom. All of the norms and expectations that you might have for going to class should be the same here, even if your teacher is not on site, if your teacher is somewhere else.
Yeah, a lot of students come to a place like Cornell and don't think of themselves as taking what they think of as online remote classes. What's been the student reaction to the class environment of this type?
Yeah, it tends to be very positive. I think, first of all, students are happy that they're able to take a class that maybe they didn't think initially was going to be available.
What sort of languages are we talking about here?
So these are less commonly taught languages. So not necessarily Spanish or Chinese, but rather languages like Tibetan or Romanian, Sinhala, Zulu, Yoruba, these kinds of languages. So
really less commonly taught languages.
Yeah. And yeah, the students, unfortunately, I don't think that we're always reaching all the students that might be interested in these languages, because so many times I'll have a student say, I had no idea that you had this, and I was so happy to discover it. So yeah, it's really a question of giving students an opportunity to explore not just a language, but also a culture, a history, a whole other way of thinking that maybe they didn't know was available to them.
I was just in a Sinhala class. For those of you that don't know, that's the main language of Sri Lanka. And the student said, it was the end of the class, and we were chatting a bit, and the student said, oh yeah, this is my favorite class. It's my favorite class I've had at Cornell. It's so great to connect back with my heritage and my family through learning this language. So he seemed very positive about it.
A decent number of students that we have are heritage learners. So they've had some exposure to the language growing up. Maybe it's a language that their parents spoke in the kitchen, but they might not have had their formal education in that language. So that's definitely one of the big opportunities that the Shared Course Initiative provides.
What other reasons do students take really almost never taught languages like that?
I think that another reason is for research. if you're a graduate student or a PhD student and you're learning about an area of the world that is, that one of these languages is associated with, then you'd learn the language. But there are other reasons too. We had a student at Columbia who took Sinhala because he wanted to write a novel set in Sri Lanka. He was a creative writing master's student, and he took the language and he did really well. He really learned a lot, even though it's a difficult language. And now I think he's finishing his book.
Oh, that's a nice story. Yeah.
Right.
So what do the teachers think of it? Is it a completely different way of teaching? Do they have to redo their class, go to a whole lot of work to teach this way?
Well, this is a great question because I actually taught in this format once. About 2 years ago, I was a graduate student at Yale, and I was in the Italian department, and I was asked to teach an Italian class from New Haven to Yale NUS, which is a campus associated with Yale, and that's in Singapore. So I was in New Haven. My students were in Singapore. 12 or 13-hour difference, depending on what time of year it was, and I found it to be a very engaging experience. I remember my first class. It was super immersive and almost shockingly so. So that by the end of the class, I was so overwhelmed by this sensory experience that I as soon as it was over, I had to lie down and was just like, what did I just experience? I sort of liken it to what somebody might have experienced in the late 1800s when they used the telephone for the first time. It's just a new category of experience. But you quickly get accustomed to it. I've told this story a few times, so you'll have to forgive me if you've heard it before, but it's a great story. We were learning about some of the various climate-related words like rain and snow and sun and things like that in my Italian class.
Where the students were in Singapore.
Yeah. So they were in Singapore. I was in New Haven. And it was February, and there was quite a bit of snow on the ground. So we were learning about these words, and a student who was from Russia was saying how it's always hot in Singapore, and she never gets to see snow, which, obviously there's plenty of snow in Russia. Mm-hmm. And I said, there's snow here. And she said, snow? And I said, yeah. And she said, I love snow. This was all in Italian, and she was able to do it at this point. And I said, wait 1 minute. And I ran upstairs, because it was in the lower level of the Yale Center for Language Study. I took a chunk of snow, because it was icy snow, it was in chunks, came down, and I said, look, snow. And she said, I love snow. And she jumped up and she ran towards the screen and touched the screen and touched the snow on the screen. Uh-huh. And I was like, wow, that was a pretty visceral reaction. Yeah. But yeah, it kind of, in a way, kind of shows you how the technology can bridge distance and really give you a genuine experience even at such a distance.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
I guess you restrained yourself from throwing the snowball at the camera, then.
I did not do that. No. That would not have been good.
Yeah.
The technology there's a little bit of a learning curve, but not too much. And once you do that, the technology is not really a problem. I think the bigger question, the thing that takes a little more time, is the pedagogy, is refining the pedagogy, because every teacher starts out knowing how to teach in a classroom, in a face-to-face classroom. And when you're put in this new environment, you can try to introduce the pedagogy at a theoretical level beforehand, but it's really kind of a learn by experience. So you make a hypothesis about what might work. You try out a solution for translating a pedagogical maneuver that you would do in a face-to-face classroom in this new distance context, and maybe it works, maybe it doesn't, and you refine it and develop it such that over time, what started out maybe as a face-to-face class, you go through a couple of different phases. So you've got you're a teacher of a less commonly taught language, then you start teaching it in this format, and what you're doing is based very much on what you did previously in the face-to-face class. But over time, and over the course of several semesters, what happens is your class naturally evolves into a different version of that class, such that it's really optimized for the distance environment.
Don't the remote students, the ones who aren't at the same site with the teacher and see the teacher and the other students on a screen, don't they feel kind of like second-class citizens?
Well, there's definitely the concern that they might, but I think that we do a pretty good job of trying to integrate them in a couple of different ways. I think that one of the best ways, or one of the most important things that we do, is the instructors travel to the remote sites, and they actually meet each other, and many instructors have reported that once they do that, then the dynamic in the class changes, that they have a deeper connection with the student.
There still is something about having a actual face-to-face, at least occasional contact.
Well, what's so interesting about that is when you get to know somebody through a high-definition video conferencing, you get about, I would say, maybe 85% of that person. You understand them in a certain way, and your mind kind of fills in the gaps. But when you meet them in face-to-face, when you meet them in real life, and you see the ways in which what you hypothesized about what that person would be like is a little bit different in real life. And so you kind of redo your image in your mind of what that person is like. I had a student who, from Yale and US, who visited me in New Haven after the class was over, and when we first met, he was like shocked, because he's like, "Wow, you're so much taller than I thought. I thought you were like 5'7" and you're 6'2". And I'm like, "Yeah, wow." So yeah, there's always this funny moment of estrangement, but also recognition. And there are some ways in which the distance format kind of allows students to feel a little bit less pressure than you might in a face-to-face setting. So it's a complex phenomenon. It's not something that just is, it's like this or like that. It's a whole sequence of emotions and feelings that you really have to experience for yourself. I can't describe it very well. I don't know if you've experienced that too.
Well, yes. When you get to know the students, when you run into some of those students live, it is a different thing, for sure. And I've sometimes had meetings and all with people that I had already seen face to face, and you do get just a little different impression. On the other hand, you can do your business.
That's true. Yeah,
it can work.
Absolutely. And if I to just pick up on that question a little bit more, one thing that we've started to encourage and that's been happening more frequently is for there to be ways in which students can actually meet each other, or maybe they can do something together, or go to a restaurant together, or attend some kind of function together, and that really creates some in-person bonding experiences that tend to be very valuable.
Well, how about even the basic teaching move of doing pair work? Does that always have to be, my pair always have to be at the same site, or can they do pair work across sites?
Yeah, that's a big question that teachers tend to have, and it seems that instructors have developed different approaches to this challenge. One approach that the Tamil instructor at Columbia has found productive is that he kind of sees the three different sites, because he taught a multi-site class. He sees them as teams, and so he'll create an activity that everybody has to try to solve some type of puzzle, or some type of complete a task, and we'll see which team does better, or does it faster, or something like that. So that's one approach. But there are other ways of doing pair work that work pretty well. And as you get more accustomed to them, then they can integrate very well. I think that we've used iPads very productively. So an iPad at one site can pair with an iPad at another site through Zoom or through Skype. And if you have headphones and a microphone on those headphones, then you can really just kind of go off and work with a student like that.
I mean, sometimes these are languages and cultures where the students are really quite interested in the culture and the cultural practices that go along with it.
Yeah.
So are there examples of times when a class, even across sites, has really engaged in cultural practices that have kind of brought them together?
Yeah. That's something, as I mentioned, that's something that we really try to encourage. And the reason for that is a language is not just text. It's not just what you get out of Google Translate. A language is an accretion of human experience. It's a history, it's a culture, it's politics. It's so much more than just base level communication. And so cultural practices or cultural specific events are key to that. And just 2 weeks ago, we had the Tibetan students and the Tibetan instructors come together at Columbia to celebrate the Tibetan New Year, Losar, and we had some students who were taking Tibetan from Yale come down to New York City to take part in that event. And there's a lot to it. There's food and there's decorations and it's really kind of a collective ritual. And I think it's particularly interesting given that Tibetan language speakers are in a situation of diaspora. So, they're kind of recreating an event from a location that's not necessarily the same as it was when the ritual was developed. So there's a lot of theoretically interesting pieces associated with something like this. But at the base level, it's a great opportunity for the students to interact with one another, but also in a way that's relevant to what they're studying.
I know our Yoruba teacher has gone to Columbia and had traveled to Queens and gotten to a Nigerian restaurant and
right.
Had that experience with his students. Food's an important part of any culture for sure.
The Zulu class traveled to New York City to go to a theatrical to see a play that was relevant to what they were studying. So that was another opportunity for students to come together in this kind of way. So yeah, we have an increasing number of examples of this, and it's definitely something that we want to continue to encourage.
Well, where's this model kind of going? Is it something that smaller schools than Cornell, Columbia, and Yale could do, since they probably don't have Sinhala and Tibetan offered or needed in a way?
Yeah, well, the thing about the Shared Course Initiative is that in many ways it's really a model that we've developed that can be adapted and deployed in different ways. It can suit whatever context you might have. I think the most important thing is to think through what kinds of in which ways could you potentially collaborate with other partners? How could you pool together resources to sort of mutually benefit all parties? And once you've figured that out, then you can figure out what kind of technology you need, what kind of pedagogy you need, what kind of administrative moves you need to make to allow that to happen. But I think that the less commonly taught languages is really a productive space in which you can do that, because it's often the case that different universities don't have the same less commonly taught languages, so you don't really have an overlap. It might not work so well for Spanish, for example, because every university has Spanish instruction.
And their classes tend to be full up to the number they need. Because that's still an issue with this. A language class with 2 students in it is a little bit dead in a way, and I know that's happened sometimes, and the teacher ends up having to adapt everything to the particular interests of those 2 students and can't do her curriculum as she'd like to. On the other hand, there's a maximum number that works really well for language classes too, though that varies at different colleges. But in this kind of setting, what seems to be the maximum that we can handle?
We say 12. 12 is our maximum. And once you there can be an exception to that. We can maybe go a little bit more. But, we find that when you have 2 big screens, 2 70, 80-inch screens showing 3 sites at the same time, you don't want to have too many students. So there's really kind of a sweet spot between 6 and 12 for these less commonly taught language classes. And it's true that if you think about it, if you're taking a class with just one other student, you only have one other person to talk to besides the instructor. But when you open it up and you have maybe 2 or 3 sites participating, then you also have more peers, more people to talk to, more people who are going through the same process of language learning that you are.
And actually, another site gives a kind of dynamism to the class. Like there's the old display question teachers ask, well, what's the weather out today? When everybody in the class knows what the weather is because they just walked into the classroom. But when people are in a different city, that can be that turns into a real question that they have to answer and really inform each other.
I mean, yeah, it's always kind of surprising to me how different the weather is between New Haven, Columbia, and New York City, and Cornell in Ithaca.
Up here in the frozen north. Right?
But definitely in an elementary level class, that's a classic activity or a question or line of discussion.
Yeah. Everybody talks about the weather, even though nobody ever does anything about it, as Mark Twain said.
Right.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Chris. It's been very interesting.
Thank you so much for having me. And just a quick plug, if I may. You can find us online at sharedcourseinitiative.org, or just Google Shared Course Initiative, and we should be one of the first things that you see. So thanks a lot.
The Language Resource Center is located on the ground floor of Stimson Hall on Cornell's main campus in Ithaca, New York. Check us out on the web at lrc.cornell.edu or look for Cornell LRC on Facebook and Twitter. Speaking of Language is produced by Sam Lupowitz and Dan Gable. Recorded by Sam Lupowitz. Original music by Sam Lupowitz, Dan Gable, and Joe Gibson.